to raise the concerns of red and blue mayors from Puerto Rico. I emphasize red and blue mayors, Republican and Democratic mayors, regarding her recent secret policy regarding transactions or grants for FEMA money that exceed $100,000. So to their surprise, they found out that grants and funding assignments exceeding $100,000 would now need to be approved by Secretary Noem. But there was no transparency regarding that rule. And we have no information regarding the application and the enforcement of that rule. And I sent her a letter with 15 other members asking those questions, and I got a letter in response that has no answers to these questions. And I wanted to urge her to reconsider this policy that is delaying aid and reconstruction funds for the people of Puerto Rico, which are still suffering 9 years after Hurricane Maria, and that this is affecting Republicans and Democrats, that reconstruction should not have a party ID, and that instead of fighting the bureaucracy, this has made the bureaucracy worse. But unfortunately, Secretary Noem left early, and we are left expecting these answers. Thank you, and with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ogles, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses. Let's be clear. The United States of America is safer today because of President Trump. The United States of America is the dominant predator across all landscapes because of President Trump. We have restored our status as the global leader because of President Trump. Hard stop. Now, when we look at the topic of the hearings, the objectives, there were 6 bullet points. I'm going to hit the highlights, examine the full scope of evolving threats facing the United States of America, particularly on readiness at the federal, local, and state level. Highlight the significant, number 2, the significant national security gains achieved by President Donald Trump. 3, review the Trump administration's efforts to reverse the damage caused by the Biden border crisis. 4, analyze the scale and scope of cyber threats, which is my area as the chairman of the cyber subcommittee. 5, discuss the evolving terrorism landscape, including FTOs, HVEs, and DVEs. And 6, evaluate emerging unconventional threats. Unfortunately, my colleagues must not have read the memo, because that's not what they've talked about. They want to talk about ICE and immigration. So let's talk about that. You know, in 1965, we passed the Hart-Celler Act. Since that time, we've seen chain migration on a scale that, quite frankly, I'm not sure even the progressive liberal authors of that bill could have possibly imagined. In that amount of time, we've seen 60 million migrants come into this country, most of which, 90%, from third world countries. There are roughly 300,000 Afghans in America, 200,000 of which came under Biden. Approximately 45% of Afghans are on U.S. food stamps. Afghans under the Biden administration have an unemployment rate double that of Americans. 68% of Afghans are on Medicaid. Let's go overseas. And so if that sounds like political rhetoric, let's look at the facts. Paris, 48% of crimes committed by foreigners, most of which were Muslim. Overall crime has surged since the Islamic migrant influx. That is from the French Interior Ministry. London, 40% of sex crimes are committed by foreigners, most of which are Muslims. That's the Metropolitan Police Department. Rome, 83% of 2024 street robberies by non-EU citizens, almost all of which were Muslim. Sexual assaults, 69% Muslim, Italian police reports. Minneapolis, here in the homeland. Violent crime in Cedar Riverside, a Somali hub, rose 56%. 2010 to 2018. Dearborn, Michigan, crime 105% above the national average. Hamtramck, outside of Detroit, 92% of assaults by Muslim immigrants. Drug arrests, 85% Muslim immigrants. Now let's go to Nashville, Tennessee, where a Somali man, a migrant who came in 2015, raped to death a woman on the steps of a church. I've had enough. I've said it once, and I'll say it again. Deport them all. This is our country. We get to decide who comes in, and we get to decide who has to leave. And I say, deport them all. 90% that have come into this country are from third world countries, most of which are sucking resources from American citizens, burdening our cities. They do not belong here. Mr. Kent, I'm chairman of the Cyber Subcommittee. Let's go into the scope and scale of the cyber threats posed by the CCP. I give you the floor, sir.
CCP is probably one of the more aggressive actors in the cyberspace right now. NCTC is mostly focused on the terrorism realm and how terrorist actors are using the proliferation of encrypted devices and just the internet to spread propaganda. That's probably our biggest purview in terms of cyber.
Mr. Glasheen.
Chairman, I would say that the Chinese government, the CCP, is our greatest cyber threat. It is a full-time job, and the resources they throw at this is unbelievable. It's a major concern.
You know, I want to thank the witnesses for being here, and I want to thank President Trump. You know, as I sit in the skiff and I'm reading the briefings from the CIA and the FBI on the daily attacks to our country and to our infrastructure, I appreciate the president, and I appreciate you gentlemen and your service to this country in keeping Americans safe. They have no idea what you do every single day. God bless you, and God bless America. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Poe, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and to our ranking member. Yes, indeed, we've spoken a great deal and learned many things here today, some of which are still going unanswered, many questions that all of us still have. And there are a vast number of threats that endanger our homeland, from increasingly sophisticated state-sponsored terrorist networks to evolving technologies. Our law enforcement agencies are engaging criminals on multiple fronts and facing significant demands every single day. Next year, there will be an increasingly heightened threat environment in my district in northern New Jersey as we host the World Cup. Federal counterterrorism grant funding is absolutely critical in keeping our communities safe against the evolving threat environment. This is why I have been so deeply disturbed by the decision of Secretary Noem to freeze, delay, and cut billions of dollars in federal counterterrorism grant funds. In February, her department, DHS, froze billions of dollars in counterterrorism grants that had already been awarded to states and cities. This decision left state and local public safety organizations unable to access critical funding. DHS then ignored legal deadlines for releasing this year's installment of the $1.5 billion for these counterterrorism programs. And when DHS finally released this funding, she abruptly and illegally slashed funding to states with Democratic governors like New Jersey. States and localities have sued in federal court for funding owed by the federal government that was appropriated for them by Congress. In October, I sent a letter to Secretary Noem, and if she was here, I would be saying this directly to her, signed by all of my Democratic colleagues in New Jersey's delegation, demanding that she stop playing politics with federal counterterrorism funding and immediately restore New Jersey's allocation. Specifically, I'm referring to the 50% cut to New Jersey's allocation of the Homeland Security Grant Program, which includes the Urban Area Security Initiative and the State Homeland Security Program. This is the single largest preparation grant program in the Federal Emergency Management Agency. New Jersey has relied on these federal grants to respond and prepare against terrorist attacks. When she published the notice of funding opportunities for the Homeland Security Grant Program, she stated that her intent to allocate this funding was going to be based on statutory risk assessment and an analysis of relative risk to terrorism faced by the 100 most populous areas in the country. Under this process, New Jersey was preliminarily allocated around $19 million, but DHS final award notification, our state received just $9 million. The final award notification failed to explain why such drastic cuts were made. Instead, she simply stated that it was done, quote, per DHS directive. To this day, we have still not received, I have not received a response to my letter. And I absolutely cannot understand and am so incredibly disappointed by the fact that this administration continues to try and attempt to walk all over this body. Congress is Article 1 branch, and we demand that we receive the respect that is due and that she respond to the questions, and that is her responsibility and her job. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize the gentlelady from South Carolina, Ms. Biggs, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witnesses for being here today. I know you have a really difficult job. I want to take a moment just to highlight the fantastic work of the Homeland Security Advisory Council. I think when I say this, I speak on behalf of our entire South Carolina delegation when I say that I'm pleased to see South Carolina's own Governor Henry McMaster appointed to chair the HSAC. Since its inception in 2002, the Council's mission has been to offer the department real-time advice across the whole spectrum of security issues, and I think this is especially critical for a state like mine in South Carolina, where we face everything from severe weather events such as Hurricane Helene to major port security and cyber security concerns. But I'll move on, and I would like to direct this statement to Director Kent. China is and has been for quite some time the primary great power competitor to the U.S. I think some of my colleagues have already established that today. And I think we've identified the pacing challenge for our national security strategies. Chinese companies have made land acquisitions near sensitive military sites in the U.S., and Chinese researchers have engaged in espionage and intellectual property theft. Chinese national encounters at our northern and southern borders surged in fiscal year 24, and China remains the primary supplier of precursor chemicals contributing to American overdose deaths. So my question, Director, is to what extent do you see a nexus between China's destabilizing activities and the terror threat landscape in the United States?
Thank you for that question, and that's a very important topic, especially in terms of fentanyl and the precursors the Chinese Communist Party provides. Working directly with the cartels, we have agents of the Chinese Communist Party, some directly affiliated and some indirectly affiliated, that are working with the cartels to continue to change essentially the recipe of the fentanyl, because as we designate these different precursors and they kind of fall off the market or become more regulated, these advanced chemists will then come into play, and they're the ones that provide the new ingredients, the new ways to manufacture fentanyl that kills American citizens. So this is something that we're looking at, in particular the relationship between these Chinese actors and the Mexican drug cartels.
Well, thank you so much. And sir, if you have any additional information, I'd be happy to hear.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks for the opportunity. I think to your question is, if our country's destabilized, it creates a lot of vulnerabilities for us. And whether it be the fentanyl is what you're talking about here, it could definitely affect our national security. Regarding the fentanyl, one thing Director Patel recently did is we've recognized the challenge that fentanyl faces in the United States. And instead of continuing to address the symptom, look at the root of the problem. He recently went over to China, met with his counterparts in MSP, and they agreed to put 13 precursor chemicals on an export control list. And if we can prevent the chemicals and the precursors coming to the United States or into the, Mexico or anyone that puts together the fentanyl that comes into the United States, that can have a greater effect to reduce that threat to the United States.
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate you being here and hope you realize how important your work is. And I know the district, my 3rd district of South Carolina, is counting on you to continue that hard work. I yield back, sir.
Gentlelady yields back. I now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Walkinshaw, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I regret that Secretary Noem tapped out after 2 hours, but nonetheless, I want to focus on an issue that I think is really important: the misuse of taxpayer funds and the steering of DHS funds to politically connected firms tied to the Secretary's office, while hiding that activity from the American people. Secretary Noem has been criticized by members of her own party and by the Trump administration for being slow and ineffective when Americans actually need her help. Republican Senator Tom Tillis said she was, quote, slow off the mark in getting disaster aid out the door. A senior administration official recently told Politico that there was, quote, some fishy stuff going on with money at DHS. And the veto authority she handed to Corey Lewandowski over contracts and grants has delayed life-saving resources after disasters. So when it comes to helping disaster victims, she's been slow and ineffective. But when it came to spending money on her own image and then funneling that money to her friends and her political allies, she moved with remarkable speed. According to reporting by ProPublica, DHS obligated $220 million for an advertising campaign featuring her in staged, phony border imagery and featuring pictures of President Trump's private properties. That money, that taxpayer money, was routed through a newly created and secretive Delaware shell company. It was then secretly funneled from that shell company to a firm with direct political and personal ties to her office and her political operation. That firm is called the Strategy Group. This situation has all of the elements of political corruption. First, she invoked emergency authority to bypass competitive bidding. Second, she concealed the true destination of the money by routing it through a shell company, a red flag in any corruption investigation. Third, the firm that actually did the work, that filmed her attempting to herd cattle, has documented political and personal ties to the secretary and her senior leadership. Fourth, her directive requiring personal approval of all contracts over $100,000 concentrated power in the hands of the very people tied to the firm that secretly received the work, her and Mr. Lewandowski. At the exact time this contract was executed, DHS was diverting investigators and resources away from child exploitation, away from child trafficking, away from illegal gun smuggling, yet somehow she found nearly $250 million to promote herself, and the money flowed to her political allies. A federal contracting law expert quoted in ProPublica summarized it plainly. It's corrupt is the word. That's what I would have liked to ask the secretary about today. I would have asked if she personally approved the money that flowed to her political and personal allies. I would have asked if whether when she was governor of South Dakota in 2023 and the same firm got $8.5 million of taxpayer money, whether she steered the money to them, because an official in her administration said she did. That's what I would have asked her, but she had to leave early. Mr. Glasheen, are you familiar with the Proud Boys?
I'm familiar with the name, yeah, Proud Boys.
Okay, does the FBI still designate the Proud Boys as an extremist organization? They did in 2018 in President Trump's first term.
We are in the process right now of changing our categories for domestic terrorism.
So they're no longer designated as an extremist organization. The FBI designated them an extremist organization in 2018. Has that changed?
I'm not aware that they did that.
It's all over the media, sir. It's widely reported. Can you get back to me on that?
Sure will.
All right, thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Knott, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I go into my line of questioning, it's worth notice that the previous administration labeled Catholic churches and charities as domestic terrorists, and there was no outrage about that from the other side of the aisle. But regards to today's hearing, threats that currently face the country, we have millions of people in this country right now who will harm the country either with specific intent or by natural effect. There's a refusal to assimilate. There's a disdain for Western values. There's even a disdain for this country. We've seen it recently in the unfortunate but staggering case that we've become aware of in Minnesota. Somalian groups who have come here to defraud the United States to the tune of billions of dollars, submitting fake invoices, at least motivated in part for personal enrichment, and then to fund terrorist groups back home, our adversaries. And one of the points that I find most disgraceful from the other side of the aisle, they would rather talk about Secretary Noem rather than these threats that we are trying to combat. And they also say that this is strictly a race issue. That's a disgusting accusation. From my experience in law enforcement, there were people from all over the world who exploited the open border policies or weak legal immigration policies to come here, whether they were from Eastern Europe, China, Russia, the Middle East, Northern Africa, Pacific Islands, and of course, South America. It's a full world problem that is operating inside of our borders. So, Mr. Kent, let me just start with you. How can we programmatically identify, again, these threats that arrive at the point of millions of people who are here specifically harming the country?
So right now we're in the triage phase. We've already identified 18,000 individuals who have ties to known suspected terrorists and terrorist organizations. So we're starting with them, working with DHS and the FBI to locate and deport them. But as you pointed out, it is a much bigger problem. We've had 2 to 2.7 million folks from Muslim countries, Muslim regions that have come into the country under Biden with minimum to no vetting.
Well, I asked you the question, how do you vet someone that doesn't come from a functioning country?
Exactly. You simply can't. That's why prior to the Biden administration, these individuals, even ones who wanted to claim asylum, they had to go to the first safe third country. And it would take 18 months to 2 years to properly vet them. Biden threw all of that out the window.
We were assured by Secretary Noem's predecessor that every Afghani refugee who came in under the asylum program was thoroughly vetted. Was that true?
That was a lie. Any of those individuals who were vetted, such as the terrorists in D.C., they were vetted under a war zone standard to see if they could serve as a soldier or as a guard or a cook or something like that, to see if they posed a threat to us tactically in Afghanistan or Iraq, but not to be our neighbors. Two completely different systems of vetting. The Biden administration used the tactical vetting as a ruse to get millions of people into the
And then once they were here, we have eyewitness testimony that they were deployed to military bases and then picked up by people who were already in the country, never to be seen again. Is that consistent with what you've seen in your current position?
Absolutely. We're having a hard time running down where a lot of these individuals are. That's why we haven't been able to locate and deport all of them rapidly.
What tools can we assist you with in identifying these self-radicalizing circles who are inside the country currently? One thing that I want to be sure that the people who are watching this know is that the shooter who committed the act of terrorism against the 2 National Guard members, he was radicalized here.
Yeah.
How are we going to identify, again, the people who are inside of our own borders, empowering our enemies to commit harm inside this country?
Right now, the Trump administration has essentially gone back to letting us enforce laws, letting us enforce immigration standards, and letting us vet people. What I would like to emphasize to this committee and to the American people is that we simply cannot go back and retroactively vet these millions of folks that came in under Joe Biden. We have to locate them, and we have to deport them as soon as we possibly can. Those who want to reapply, they can have the opportunity to reapply. So in terms of what we need, we just need the longitude to do our jobs. We're getting that from the Trump administration, and we appreciate the support of this committee.
Yep. Mr. Glasheen, I want to give you a time to answer. In terms of the types of domestic terror that we currently face inside of our own borders, can you briefly describe that with the remaining minute that I have?
Yeah, and thanks for the opportunity. I want to make very clear, I know the question came up earlier about designating the prevalence. The FBI doesn't designate domestic terror groups. We don't do that.
That wasn't a serious line of questions.
We investigate people.
Yes.
And the common component there is violence. So I want to make that very clear. And so in terms of regarding the domestic terrorism threat, we have over 1,700 domestic terrorism investigations in the U.S. And with respect to Antifa, which was asked earlier, we have approximately 70 Antifa investigations. Our arrests with Antifa-related subjects are up 171% this year.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
I now recognize gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Carter. 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, witnesses, for being here. I represent the New Orleans region where we welcome partnership. We do not welcome occupation. What we're seeing unfold in our community is not public safety. It's a political stunt wrapped in badges, armored vehicles, and military uniforms. ICE and Border Patrol agents have descended into our community with no transparency and no meaningful coordination with local officials. The militarized forces who are not trained in our local laws, not trained in community-based de-escalation, and do not know our neighborhoods or our people. This is a recipe for disaster, confusion, and dangerous mistakes. Our communities are not a stage for political theater. If this administration wants to partner, then act like it. Share the plan, respect local law, and work with us, not around us. Unfortunately, Kristi Noem, our secretary, had to leave in the middle of a very important conversation to go and talk about dismantling FEMA, a discussion we'll have at another time that for the life of me, I simply can't understand why we would want to decentralize the Federal Emergency Management Agency, an agency that is needed more now than it was needed when it was first created, as natural disasters continue to happen more often than ever before in places it's never happened before. But nonetheless, if she were here, but she's not, I'll ask her chair. Secretary Noem, I recently stood with local elected leaders from the city of New Orleans and our mayor-elect, Helena Moreno, as they urged DHS agents to commit to transparency, due process protections, identifiable federal agents, safeguards against discriminatory enforcement, and humanitarian protections. I would ask her if she were here, but she isn't. Ma'am, will you commit your department to uphold these values during the current operation in Louisiana? Apparently they aren't doing that, but because I know both of you are capable of answering this question and are in fact civil servants that have demonstrated in your career that you do understand transparency, that you do understand the Constitution. So I'll ask you the question, do you think this request from our mayor-elect in New Orleans is a reasonable one? Is it reasonable to ask that agents commit to transparency, due process protections, identifiable agents, and safeguards against discriminatory enforcements? Yes or no? Do you think that's a reasonable ask? Yes or no? Is that reasonable?
Sounds reasonable, yeah.
Thank you. Do you think it's reasonable, sir?
Sounds reasonable.
Thank you. Secretary Noem, the masked officers you sent into the streets of New Orleans are attempting to arrest and abduct and detain anyone that looks like a migrant. I got to ask the question, what does a migrant look like? Do you know what a migrant looks like, sir? Yes? Can you define what a migrant looks like to you?
I cannot.
Thank you. Can you tell me what you think a migrant looks like?
These are targeted raids.
Can you tell me what they
done
look
against
like?
people. Yeah, you have to stop them. You have to check their identification.
Okay, but
check
can
their
you tell me if you were describing to me as a new $50,000 bonused ICE agent, what does a migrant look like?
You would stop and you would ask them for ID, and you'd be on an intelligence-driven operation, which is what these ICE raids are. They're intelligence.
But if you were to say a guy's wearing a red shirt, you would say the guy's wearing a red shirt and a purple baseball hat.
No one
You
is-
would be able to
no one's
give that
gonna find
description.
shirt color.
But can you give a description of what a migrant looks like? Can you give a description of what a migrant looks like?
We need to deploy ICE officers to stop people and ask them, and they go on intelligence.
I reclaim my time. You clearly don't want to answer my question, and that's unfortunate because the American people want to know these answers. We want to know. I've got a quick video I want to show before my time runs. Please.
Look at this. This is a stunning video from Louisiana. You hear that woman cry out. She's a 23-year-old running down the street away from the masked agents who are chasing her, repeating that she is a U.S.-born citizen, saying,
Stop. This is a United States citizen who's running away from ICE agents who, when she gets to her house and her husband comes out, they stop the chase. They clearly weren't chasing her for that. They appear to have been doing something nefarious. You know why we can't tell the difference? Because they wear masks and they don't identify themselves as agents. That's a problem, Mr.
Gentleman's time's expired. I recognize
yield.
the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Van Epps, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the Secretary and gentlemen. Thank you for being here today at this critical hearing. I'm honored to be here at my very first hearing as the newest member of Congress. And I've had the privilege to serve this country for over 20 years in uniform, first as an active duty U.S. Army helicopter pilot with service with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, and currently serving in the Tennessee Army National Guard. And I'm honored to continue the mission from a new post with this distinguished committee. To our witnesses today, allow me to begin by expressing my appreciation for the work you all do, for the work your teams do, the work that President Trump and this administration does to ensure the safety and security of our great nation. I have just a couple of questions focused on emerging AI-enabled threats. Adversaries are already using AI to identify exploitable vulnerabilities within systems and networks and generate cyber intrusion plans far faster than traditional cyber tools. Mr. Glasheen, sir, foreign cyber actors are increasingly using AI to refine malware, automate phishing, and sift large volumes of stolen data. What additional cooperation or coordination between the FBI, DHS, and companies within the private sector would most improve early detection of AI-enabled intrusions? Or if you would just like to comment on this matter generally.
No, I appreciate that opportunity. AI is a continued challenge right now. I think the relationships we have right now with government, private industry are strong right now with respect to any type of malware, ransomware. I think the CISA 2015 authorization that gives us the authorities, that's critical for the future success of that. And I think for the ongoing partnerships, I mean, the key piece here is that relationship with private sector, private industry. So we just continue to reinforce that.
Thank you, sir. Director Kent, anything further you'd like to add on that from?
No, AI is something we're closely monitoring. I mean, the ability for terrorists to breach language barriers and also to inspire people to conduct attacks and then give them AI-specific instructions, something we're monitoring carefully and very concerned about.
Thank you, sir. Thank you both. I know you both spent your entire careers defending this country and greatly appreciate that, your service and sacrifice. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield? Mr. Van Epps, can I have your time?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Kent, I want to talk to you a little bit about what we just had with Mr. Carter. I want to let you finish the answer about what
Infiltrate easily while they communicate into an inspirational methodology where you have key members putting out media and putting out how-to guides to reach out and to touch individuals inside the United States. We recently disrupted one of those attacks just before Halloween, thanks to the work of the FBI with support from really the entire U.S. intelligence community and the Joint Terrorism Task Force model in Michigan. That plot touched multiple states and had ties to ISIS inside Iraq and Syria. Another issue that we are addressing right now, thanks to the decisive leadership of President Trump, is the scourge of fentanyl, gang, and cartel violence. Under President Trump's leadership, we've designated these cartels and gangs as terrorist organizations, and we've done that rightfully so. These individuals, these terrorists, have killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, as these angel families will tell you firsthand. What President Trump has done by designating them as terrorists has allowed us to turn the tools of the intelligence community against them and predominantly watch list them as terrorists to prevent them from ever coming into America in the first place. To date, we've added about 35,000 of these narco-terrorists to our terrorist watch list, and we've stopped just around 6,000 of these terrorists from ever entering our country, from setting foot inside of America so they can no longer kill Americans with impunity. These are just some of the issues that we're covering 24/7, 365 at the National Counterterrorism Center, and I look forward to discussing more with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Kent. And now recognize Director Glasheen for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Garbarino, Ranking Member Thompson, and members of the committee. I'm Operations Director Michael Glasheen. I oversee the FBI's National Security Divisions. I am honored to be here with you, representing the people of the United States, the FBI, who tackle the complex and grave threats we face with perseverance, professionalism, and integrity. Our nation faces serious and evolving threats ranging from international terrorists to hostile foreign intelligence operatives, from sophisticated cyber attacks to internet-facilitated sexual exploitation of children, from violent gangs and criminal organizations to public corruption and corporate fraud. Keeping pace with these threats is a significant challenge. Our adversaries take advantage of the internet, social media, and emerging technologies like artificial intelligence to influence the American people, facilitate